The royal nursery wasn't a playground, it was a battlefield. They said the Alpha King's son was cursed, a 4-year-old boy who had bitten 3 nannies, hospitalized a beta, and screamed until his throat bled whenever a woman tried to hold him. King Silas Mercer was the most powerful wolf on the continent, yet he was powerless against his own son's hatred. But on a rainy Tuesday, amidst the shattered glass of a throne vase, the impossible happened. A shivering, destitute Omega floor scrubber didn't just calm the savage prince. She made him stop crying, and when the boy looked up at the woman the entire pack despised, he didn't growl. He whispered one word that would shatter the king's world and start a war. Mom. The hierarchy of the Crescent Peak pack was etched in stone, and Audrey Tate was at the very bottom, buried under the dirt. As an Omega with no family connections and a wolf that had been dormant since her 18th birthday, Audrey was invisible. She wasn't just a pack member, she was part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the creaky floorboards of the royal estate. She was 24, with hands roughened by bleach and a back that constantly ached from scrubbing the marble floors of the Alpha King's mansion. Faster, Tate. The delegation from the north arrives in an hour. If I see a single smudge on this foyer, you're out on the street. The voice belonged to Mrs. Gable, the head of housekeeping. She was a stern beta woman who treated compassion like a contagious disease. Yes, Mrs. Gable, Audrey murmured, dipping her rag into the bucket of icy grey water. She didn't look up. Eye contact was interpreted as aggression or insolence, and Audrey couldn't afford to lose this job. She had rent to pay on her studio apartment in the lower district, and her heating bill was 3 months overdue. And stay away from the East Wing, Mrs. Gable hissed, leaning down, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that wasn't meant to be kind. The prince is having a day. Audrey nodded, wringing out the cloth. Everyone knew about Prince Toby. The terror of the Peak. King Silas Mercer had lost his fated mate, Queen Genevieve, 4 years ago during childbirth. It was a tragedy that had turned the once warm Alpha King into a statue of ice. He ruled with efficiency and brutality, his heart buried in the crypt with his wife, but he had left behind a son, Toby Mercer, the Crown Prince. Rumors flew through the servants' quarters like wildfire. Some said the boy was possessed. Others said he was feral because he lacked a mother's scent. He was 4 years old, and he had never spoken a full sentence. He communicated in screams, bites, and the destruction of property. Just last week, a high-ranking noblewoman, hoping to court the king, had tried to hug the boy. Toby had locked his teeth into her forearm so hard she required 12 stitches. Audrey felt a pang of sympathy for the child, though she kept it hidden. She knew what it was like to be angry at the world, to feel alone in a room full of people. I said, "Do you understand?" Mrs. Gable snapped. "Stay away from the East Wing." "Understood," Audrey said softly. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. 2 hours later, a catastrophic plumbing failure in the third-floor guest bathroom required all hands on deck. The staff was running frantic with buckets and towels. In the chaos, Mrs. Gable shoved a basket of fresh linens into Audrey's chest. "Run these to the linen closet on the 2nd floor. Now, and don't let the guests see you." Audrey hurried up the back service stairs, her heart pounding. The 2nd floor was usually quiet, but today the air was thick with the scent of distress. It smelled like ozone and burnt sugar, the scent of an agitated alpha. She reached the linen closet, quickly stacking the towels. As she turned to leave, she heard it. A crash. The sound of porcelain shattering against a wall. Then a high-pitched, guttural scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human child. Audrey froze. The sound was coming from the slightly ajar door down the hall, the nursery. She knew she should run. She knew the rules. Omegas are not to interact with royalty. But then she heard the slap. It was the unmistakable sound of flesh hitting flesh, followed by a woman's sharp, vindictive voice. "You wretched little monster! Look what you did to my dress! This is Italian silk." The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, trembling growl. Audrey's body moved before her brain could catch up. The instinct to protect was overwhelming, overriding her fear of the king, her fear of losing her job, and her fear of her own low rank. She dropped her empty basket and sprinted toward the door. She pushed it open. The nursery was huge, filled with toys that had never been played with. In the center of the room stood a woman Audrey recognized from the tabloids, Lydia Vane. Lydia was the daughter of the alpha of the neighboring southern pack. She was beautiful, ambitious, and widely considered the front-runner to become the new Luna. Currently, Lydia was towering over a small boy who was backed into a corner. Toby Mercer was small for his age, with messy dark hair and eyes so blue they looked like shards of sky. He was shaking, clutching a torn teddy bear. There was a red mark on his cheek. Lydia raised her hand again. "I will teach you respect, you little brat, before I become your mother." "Stop!" The word ripped out of Audrey's throat. Lydia froze, her hand mid-air. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing, as she took in Audrey's grey uniform, her messy bun, her cheap shoes. "Excuse me," Lydia sneered. "Did the help just speak to me?" "You struck him," Audrey said, her voice trembling but her feet planted firmly. She stepped into the room. "He's a child. You don't hit a child." Lydia laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "I am disciplining the future alpha. Something his father clearly failed to do. Now get out before I have you flayed for insubordination." Lydia turned back to Toby, grabbing his arm roughly. "Come here, Toby. You're going to apologize." Toby's eyes went wide. The panic in them was absolute. He opened his mouth, baring small, sharp canines. "Don't touch him!" Audrey lunged forward. It happened in slow motion. Lydia yanked the boy. Toby lunged to bite. Audrey threw herself between them, shielding the boy with her own body. Lydia's hand, adorned with a heavy diamond ring, connected hard with Audrey's shoulder. At the same time, Toby, blinded by fear, sank his teeth into Audrey's arm. Pain flared hot and white. But Audrey didn't scream. She didn't pull away. She didn't scold. She slumped to her knees, wrapping her arms around the trembling boy, pulling him into her chest, ignoring the teeth in her flesh. She buried her face in his messy hair and began to hum. It was a low vibration deep in her chest, a melody she didn't remember learning, something from a childhood she couldn't recall. "Hush now, little wolf. The moon is high. The shadows flee when you pass by." Lydia stood over them, looking disgusted. "Great. Now the cleaning rat is bleeding on the carpet. Get off him." But Audrey didn't let go. And then the miracle happened. Toby released his bite. He didn't pull away. He sniffed. He took a deep, ragged breath, inhaling the scent of Audrey's neck, a scent of rain, vanilla, and something ancient and warm. The boy's rigid body went limp against hers. His small fists grabbed her uniform. "Mum," he whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible, and that was when the double doors blasted open. King Silas Mercer stood there, his presence filling the room like a thunderhead. He was 6'4" of pure, lethal alpha power. His eyes were dark, his jaw set in stone. Behind him stood his beta, Garrick, and 2 guards. Silas looked at Lydia, who was smoothing her dress, looking flustered. He looked at the shattered vase, and then his gaze dropped to the floor, to the Omega servant bleeding on his rug, and his son, who was clinging to her, as if she were the only life raft in a drowning ocean. "What?" Silas growled, his voice vibrating the floorboards, "is going on here?" The silence in the nursery was deafening. The air pressure dropped, the sheer weight of Silas's aura forcing everyone to lower their heads. Everyone except Audrey, who was too busy clutching Toby to notice she was in the presence of the most dangerous predator on the continent. Lydia Vane recovered first. She tossed her blonde hair, stepping over the broken porcelain. "Silas, darling," she cooed, her voice changing instantly from shrill to sultry. "Thank goodness you're here. This servant burst in and attacked me." She tried to hurt Toby. "I was just trying to protect him, and the boy is so confused. He attacked her." Audrey's head snapped up. "That is a lie!" "Silence!" Garrick, the beta, barked. "You do not speak to the future Luna like that." Silas didn't look at Lydia. He walked slowly into the room, his heavy boots crunching on the glass. He stopped 2 feet from Audrey. "Get up," he commanded. Audrey tried to stand, but Toby wouldn't let go. He wrapped his legs around her waist and buried his face in her neck, sobbing quietly. "No," Toby mumbled into her skin. "Mine." Silas's eyes widened. A flicker of genuine shock cracked his icy mask. He hadn't heard his son speak a word other than "no" or "go" in 2 years. "Lydia," Silas said, his voice deceptively calm. "Why does my son have a red mark on his face?" Lydia paled. He was thrashing. He hit himself with a toy. "I told you, Silas, the boy is unstable. He needs a mother's firm hand. Once we are mated, I will send him to a boarding school in the Alps. They specialize in difficult cases." Audrey felt Toby stiffen in her arms. "He is not difficult," Audrey said, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. She looked up, meeting the Alpha King's gaze. His eyes were a storm of grey and gold. "He's terrified. She hit him. I saw it." "You take the word of a floor scrubber over a high Alpha's daughter," Lydia shrieked. "Look at her. She's a nothing, a weak, wolfless Omega. She probably smells like bleach and desperation. Toby is only clinging to her because she's easy to dominate." Silas knelt. For a man of his size, the movement was graceful. He was now eye level with Audrey. He ignored the blood dripping from her arm where Toby had bitten her. He leaned in, inhaling sharply. Audrey held her breath. She knew she smelled like sweat and cheap soap, but Silas didn't recoil. His nostrils flared. He frowned, a look of confusion crossing his face. "Toby," Silas said softly. "Let go of the girl." "Mom," Toby whimpered again, tightening his grip. Silas flinched as if he'd been slapped. "She is not your mother, Toby. Your mother is gone." "Smells like safe," Toby mumbled. Silas looked at Audrey. His gaze was intense, dissecting her. "Who are you?" "Audrey Tate, Your Majesty. Housekeeping." "Audrey Tate," he tested the name. "Did you strike Lady Lydia?" "No, Your Majesty. I intervened when she struck the prince." Silas stood up slowly. He turned to Lydia. "Garrick," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Yes, Alpha. Escort Lady Lydia to her car. She is banned from the estate." Lydia's jaw dropped. "Silas, you can't be serious. Over her. The mating ceremony is in a month. My father will—" "Your father will be told that you abused the crown prince," Silas roared, his control finally snapping. The windows rattled in their frames. "If you are not off my land in 10 minutes, I will hunt you off it." Lydia turned white. She glared at Audrey with pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that promised vengeance, and then stormed out, her heels clicking furiously. Silas turned back to Audrey. The anger faded, replaced by a cold, calculating exhaustion. "You are bleeding, Miss Tate." "I'm fine, sir. It's just a scratch." "My son's bite is not a scratch. It can cause infection." He ran a hand through his dark hair. I cannot pry him off you without hurting him. He has gone boneless. It is a defense mechanism. Silas sighed, a sound of heavy defeat. Can you stand? Yes. Then bring him. Follow me. Where are we going? Audrey asked, struggling to stand with the heavy 4-year-old clinging to her. To the infirmary, Silas said, walking out without looking back. And then to my office. We have a problem, Miss Tate, and it seems you are the only solution. As Audrey followed the king down the grand hallway, carrying the heir to the throne, she felt the eyes of the other staff members on her. They were wide with shock. She didn't know it yet, but Lydia Vane wasn't just going home. She was making a phone call, and on the other end of the line was someone far more dangerous than a spoiled socialite. Audrey Tate had just walked into the center of a target. The Royal Infirmary was cleaner than any hospital Audrey had ever seen. The pack doctor, a kind elderly man named Dr. Orris, bandaged Audrey's arm while Toby sat on the exam table, refusing to let go of Audrey's other hand. Every time Dr. Orris moved too fast, Toby growled. Easy, little prince, Dr. Orris chuckled. She's not going anywhere. Silas stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching. He hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. He was observing the way Toby watched Audrey, the way the boy's breathing matched hers. It was unnatural. An alpha child should not be soothing himself with a low-level omega. It went against biology. Unless... Done, Dr. Orris said. Keep it dry, Miss Tate. Thank you, Doctor. Leave us, Silas commanded. Dr. Orris bowed and exited. Now it was just the king, the omega, and the prince. Put him down, Silas said. I don't think he wants to. Put him down. Audrey gently pried Toby's fingers from her hand. It's okay, Toby. I'm right here. She set him on the floor. Toby immediately grabbed the fabric of her pants, anchoring himself to her leg. Silas walked over to his desk. They had moved to his private study attached to the infirmary. He pulled out a file. Audrey Tate, age 24. Parents deceased in a rogue attack when you were 12. Raised in the foster system of the Western Pack. Moved here 2 years ago. No mate, no children. Wolf status. Dormant. Weak. He looked up. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Majesty. Why did my son call you Mom? The question was like a gunshot. I don't know, sir. Maybe he needs one, and I was the only one who held him. Lydia tried to hold him. He bit her. Silas narrowed his eyes. You hummed a song. What was it? Just a lullaby. I don't know where I learned it. Silas walked around the desk. He stopped inches from her. The proximity of his alpha power made Audrey's knees weak. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a magnetic pull, a biological imperative to submit. I am in a difficult position, Miss Tate. My council is pressuring me to mate. They say the boy needs a mother. They say I am too volatile without a Luna. Lydia was the best political match. You just ruined that alliance. I saved your son from being hit, Audrey argued, surprised by her own boldness. You did, Silas conceded. And now, my son seems to have imprinted on you. I cannot separate him from you without causing psychological damage. I have seen this before in pups who lose their parents. They latch on to a surrogate. He paused, looking at Toby, who was playing with a loose thread on Audrey's trousers, looking more peaceful than he had in years. I am offering you a job, Miss Tate. Audrey blinked. I already have a job. I clean the floors. Not anymore. You are now the royal nanny. You will live in the East Wing. You will eat at the staff table. But your primary duty is him. You will keep him calm. You will teach him to speak properly. You will be his companion. Audrey's heart raced. The salary for a royal nanny was 10 times what she made now. She could pay off her debts. She could fix the heater. But, Silas continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, do not mistake this for affection. You are an employee. You are an Omega. You will never be a Luna. You will never be a mother to him in anything but title. And if you ever endanger him, or if I find out you are working for my enemies—" He let his canines lengthen slightly. "I will kill you myself." Audrey swallowed hard. "I understand." "Good." Silas pressed a button on his desk. "Garrick will show you to your quarters. Your shift starts immediately." As Audrey turned to leave, Toby happily trotting beside her, Silas spoke one last time. "Miss Tate?" "Yes, Alpha. Do not make him love you, because one day you will have to leave, and I will not have his heart broken twice." Audrey looked at the lonely king, the man who had everything and nothing. "I can't control who he loves, Your Majesty. Neither can you." She walked out. Silas watched the door close. He brought his hand up to his face, rubbing his temples. The scent of her, the rain and vanilla, was lingering in the room. It was irritating. It was intoxicating. And it was terrifyingly familiar. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a locket that had belonged to his late wife, Genevieve. He opened it. Inside was a picture of Genevieve holding a baby. But it wasn't Toby. It was a baby girl. A baby that had been stolen from the hospital the day Genevieve died. A baby everyone assumed was dead. Silas looked at the door where Audrey had just exited. Age 24, he thought. The timeline doesn't fit. She is too old to be my daughter. But that scent. He picked up the phone. "Get me the private investigator," Silas said. "I want a deep dive on Audrey Tate. I want to know everything. Where she was born, who her real parents were, and find out why a dormant Omega has eyes that glow gold when she's angry." Life in the East Wing was a gilded cage, and Audrey was the bird that everyone wanted to see stop singing. It had been 2 weeks since Audrey had been promoted from floor scrubber to royal nanny. To the outside observer, she had won the lottery. She lived in a suite larger than her entire apartment building. She ate meals prepared by Michelin star chefs. She wore a uniform made of soft cotton instead of scratchy polyester. But the reality was a suffocating isolation. The staff hated her. To them, she was a traitor. An Omega who had seduced her way up the ladder using the prince as bait. When she entered the kitchen to get Toby's milk, conversations would stop abruptly. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, ensured that Audrey's own meals were always cold or missing utensils. "Did you forget a fork, Mrs. Gable?" Audrey asked one morning, staring at a plate of scrambled eggs. Mrs. Gable didn't look up from her ledger. "The silverware is for the staff, Miss Tate. Guests in the East Wing usually have room service. If you want to eat down here with us commoners, you can use your fingers. It's what you're used to, isn't it?" Audrey didn't fight back. She simply wrapped the eggs in toast and ate quickly, standing up. She couldn't afford to lose her temper. She had someone else to worry about. Toby. The change in the little prince was nothing short of miraculous, though the palace barely acknowledged it. The violent outbursts had stopped. The biting had ceased. He still didn't speak much to anyone else, but with Audrey, he was a chatterbox. "Audrey, look! A beetle!" "Audrey, why is the moon broken?" Referring to a crescent moon. "Audrey, sing the song. The shadow song." They spent their days in the royal gardens, far away from the prying eyes of the court. Audrey taught him the names of flowers. She taught him how to tie his shoes, something no one had bothered to show him because they assumed he was slow. But the most difficult part of her day wasn't the hostile staff or the energetic 4-year-old. It was the evenings. It was him. King Silas made a point of visiting the nursery every night at 8:00 p.m. sharply. He treated it like a military inspection. He would stand in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light, his scent, pine, rain, and raw power flooding the room. "Report," he would say. Audrey would stand straight. "He ate all his vegetables, Your Majesty. He practiced his alphabet. He had a small tantrum about bath time, but we compromised with a rubber duck." Silas would nod, his face unreadable. Then he would look at his son. "Good night, Toby." "Night, father," Toby would whisper, hiding behind Audrey's leg. It was tragic. Silas clearly loved his son. The pain in his eyes when he looked at the boy was palpable. But he was terrified of him, terrified of the boy's emotions, terrified of failing him again. One stormy Thursday, the routine broke. Thunder shook the castle walls. Toby, who was terrified of loud noises, woke up screaming. Audrey was in his room instantly. She scooped him out of bed, rocking him as he wailed, his small claws digging into her shoulder. "Shh, it's just the sky drumming, baby. It's just noise." The door flew open. Silas stood there, chest heaving, wearing only sweatpants. He looked wild, his eyes glowing the amber gold of his wolf. He had heard the scream and assumed they were under attack. He saw Audrey sitting in the rocking chair, Toby bundled in her arms. She was humming that same melody, her cheek pressed against the boy's forehead. Silas froze. The adrenaline crashed, leaving him exposed. He walked into the room, his footsteps silent. He knelt beside the chair. "Is he hurt?" Silas asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just scared," Audrey whispered. She looked up, and for the first time, she saw Silas not as a king, but as a man. His hair was messy. He looked exhausted. Toby peeked out from the blanket. He saw his father. Usually he would shrink away, but the storm boomed again, louder this time. Without thinking, Silas reached out a large hand. He didn't grab the boy. He just laid his hand flat on Toby's back, covering nearly the whole expanse of the child. "I am here," Silas rumbled. The sound came from his chest, a deep alpha purr meant to soothe pack members. Toby stiffened, then relaxed. He looked from Audrey to Silas. "Audrey?" Toby asked. "Yes, sweetie?" Can Papa stay?" The air left the room. Silas looked at Audrey, panic in his eyes. He didn't know how to do this. He didn't know how to be a father. "Of course," Audrey said, moving over on the oversized armchair. "There's room." It was a breach of protocol so severe it could be treason. An Omega and an Alpha King huddled together in a chair. Silas hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair. He was stiff, awkward. But as the storm raged outside, the three of them sat in the semi-darkness. Slowly, the exhaustion took over. Audrey dozed off, her head lolling to the side. She felt a warmth against her cheek. She woke up hours later, just before dawn. The storm had passed. She wasn't in the chair anymore. She was tucked into Toby's bed, the duvet pulled up to her chin. Toby was asleep on her left, and on her right, slumped awkwardly in the rocking chair, was the king of the wolves. He was asleep, his head tipped back, his mouth slightly open, and covering Audrey's feet was the king's own shirt, which he must have taken off to keep her warm. Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. She inhaled deeply. The scent of him was everywhere, and for the first time in 6 years, deep inside her soul, her dormant wolf stirred. It didn't howl, it just opened one golden eye. "Mate," the inner voice whispered. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut. "No," she told herself. "Impossible. He is the king, I am the help, and he hates me." But when she opened her eyes, Silas was awake. He was watching her, and his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning. The peace couldn't last. It never does in the royal court. 2 weeks later, the preparations for the winter solstice gala began. It was the most important event of the year, where the alphas of the 12 allied packs gathered to renew their treaties. "You will attend," Silas told Audrey one morning over breakfast. Audrey nearly choked on her toast. "Me? Your Majesty, I'm the nanny. I should stay in the nursery." "Toby must be presented to the alphas. He is the heir. He needs to be seen as stable and healthy to quell the rumors that he is—" "Feral," Silas said, tightening his tie. "He will not behave unless you are there. You will stand in the shadows, but you must be close." "I don't have a dress. Taken care of." That afternoon, a box arrived. Inside wasn't a maid's uniform, but a gown. It was a midnight blue silk that shimmered like water, modest but undeniably expensive. It matched Toby's tiny velvet suit perfectly. When Audrey walked down the grand staircase that evening, holding Toby's hand, the great hall went silent. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was in a simple braid, but the dress clung to her curves in a way the uniform never did. She looked regal. She looked like she belonged. Silas was at the bottom of the stairs, talking to Alpha Marcus of the Western Pack. He looked up. His sentence died in his throat. "By the moon," Alpha Marcus murmured. "Who is that? A visiting dignitary?" "No," Silas said, his voice tight. "That is the nanny." But Silas couldn't look away. His wolf was pacing inside him, scratching at the walls of his control. "She is ours," the beast growled. "Claim her." The evening was going surprisingly well. Toby waved at the guests. He shook hands. He stayed close to Audrey, but he didn't scream. The court whispered. The wild prince was tamed. And then the doors opened. Lydia Vane walked in. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had been banned, but on her arm was her father, Alpha Vane of the Southern Pack, one of Silas's most powerful and volatile allies. Silas couldn't kick her out without starting a war. Lydia looked stunning in red, but her eyes were venomous. She scanned the room, locked eyes with Audrey, and smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood. "Enjoying the party, Cinderella," Lydia whispered as she brushed past Audrey near the buffet table. "Stay away from him," Audrey said, pulling Toby closer. "Oh, don't worry about the brat," Lydia hissed. "I'm worried about you. Did you really think you could play house with the king and get away with it?" Lydia disappeared into the crowd. An hour later, the music stopped. The royal guards, led by Beta Garrick, marched into the center of the room. "Lock the doors," Garrick commanded. "No one leaves." The room erupted in murmurs. Silas stepped onto the dais. "What is the meaning of this, Garrick?" "My apologies, Alpha," Garrick said, looking grim. "But we have received a report of a theft. The Queen's sapphire, the necklace intended for the future Luna, is missing from the vault." Silas frowned. "That vault requires a biometric scan. Or," Lydia Vane's voice cut through the silence as she stepped forward, "someone with access to the private quarters who knows the cleaning codes." She pointed a manicured finger at Audrey. "I saw the nanny coming out of the master suite earlier today. She looked suspicious." "That's a lie," Audrey gasped. "I was in the nursery all day." "Search her room," Alpha Vane demanded. "My daughter has never lied." Silas looked at Audrey. His face was unreadable, but his fists were clenched. "Garrick, search her quarters." It took 10 minutes. The court waited in tense silence. Toby started to whimper, sensing the hostility. Audrey knelt down, whispering to him, ignoring the burning stares of hundreds of wolves. Garrick returned. He held a small velvet pouch. He tipped it over. The Queen's sapphire, a massive, priceless gem, tumbled into his hand. "Found under her mattress. Garrick said heavily. The room exploded. Thief! Rogue! Execute her! Lydia smirked. You see, Silas, you let a rat into your home, and she stole your legacy. Silas stared at the necklace. Then he stared at Audrey. The betrayal in his eyes was heartbreaking. He had started to trust her. He had started to feel for her. Audrey, Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. Did you take this? No. Audrey stood up, tears in her eyes. Silas, please, I didn't. I don't know how it got there. Do not call the king by his name, servant, Lydia shouted. She is a spy, Alpha Vane roared. A rogue sympathizer sent to weaken your house. She must be made an example of. Silas looked down at Toby, who was crying now. Garrick, take the prince to his room. No, Mum, Toby screamed, clinging to Audrey's dress. Garrick moved to grab the boy. Audrey instinctively slapped Garrick's hand away. Don't touch him, she screamed. It was a reflex, but striking a beta of the Royal Guard was a crime, punishable by death. Garrick growled and backhanded Audrey. It was a hard, tactical blow meant to subdue. Audrey flew backward, crashing into a table of champagne flutes. Glass shattered. She hit the floor hard, blood trickling from her lip. Audrey! Toby shrieked. Silas roared. Enough! But it was too late. Audrey lay amidst the broken glass. She was dizzy. Pain radiated through her jaw, but deeper than the pain, something else snapped. The humiliation, the injustice, the fear for Toby, the seal that had been placed on her wolf years ago, the dormancy that she thought was natural, cracked. Audrey tried to push herself up. Her skin felt too tight. Her bones burned. She looked up at Lydia, who was laughing. She looked at Silas, who was doing nothing to stop them. A low sound started in Audrey's throat. It wasn't a whimper. It wasn't a plea. It was a growl so deep, so resonant, that it vibrated the crystal chandelier above. The laughter in the room died. Audrey opened her eyes. They weren't brown anymore. They weren't even the common yellow of a beta or the amber of an alpha. They were violet, a brilliant, electric purple that swirled like a galaxy. I said, Audrey spoke, and her voice carried the weight of 1,000 storms, echoing with a power that forced every wolf in the room, including King Silas, to instinctively bare their necks. Do not touch my son. The silence that followed was absolute. Purple eyes, it was a myth, a bedtime story. The violet eyes belonged to the crescent moon lineage, the direct descendants of the first true Luna. They were the peacemakers, the soul speakers. They were supposed to be extinct for 100 years. Silas felt his knees buckle. The aura radiating from the small woman on the floor was crushing. It wasn't the aggressive pressure of an alpha. It was the commanding, undeniable authority of a queen. Lydia Vane turned pale. What? What is this trickery? She's a witch. Audrey stood up. The glass shards on the floor seemed to move away from her feet. The blood on her lip vanished, healed in seconds by her awakened metabolism. She didn't look at the crowd. She walked straight to Toby. The guards, terrified by the sheer power rolling off her, parted like the Red Sea. She picked up Toby. The boy stopped crying instantly, bathing in the calming pheromones she was releasing. Audrey turned to Silas. The violet fade from her eyes, leaving them a burning gold. I did not steal your necklace, she said, her voice steady but cold as ice. And I am done being your victim. She turned to walk out. Stop her, Lydia shrieked. She's a monster. Kill her. Alpha Vane, panicked by the threat this unknown power posed to his daughter's claim, shifted. He was a massive grey wolf, and he lunged for Audrey's back. No, Silas roared, but he was too far away. Vane was mid-air, jaws open to snap Audrey's neck. Audrey didn't even turn around. She simply raised her hand backward and clenched her fist. Wham! An invisible force slammed Alpha Vane into the marble floor. It was telekinetic force, a spirit walker ability. The floor tiles cracked. Vane whimpered, pinned by gravity 10 times normal. Audrey glanced back over her shoulder. If you attack me again, I will strip the wolf from your soul. She walked out of the ballroom, carrying the prince, leaving a room full of the world's most powerful alphas trembling in her wake. The dungeon, 1 hour later. Audrey didn't go far. She went to the nursery, locked the door, and waited. She knew she couldn't leave the grounds. The perimeter alarms were active. Silas arrived alone. He unlocked the nursery door with a master key. He found Audrey sitting on the floor, packing a bag. Toby was asleep in his crib. Silas stood in the doorway. He looked shaken. "Who are you?" he asked. The arrogance was gone. He sounded almost afraid. "I don't know," Audrey admitted, her hand shaking as she folded a shirt. My parents told me I was sick. They gave me pills to suppress my wolf. They said if I shifted, bad men would come." "Your parents," Silas stepped closer. "What were their names?" "Sarah and David Tate. They were betas." "No," Silas said softly. "They weren't your parents. They were your guardians." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "While you were displaying your power," my private investigator finally called back. Silas sat on the floor opposite her. 24 years ago, the royal house of the Silver River Pack was slaughtered. Everyone thought the bloodline ended. But there was a rumor that the nursemaid escaped with the infant princess. Audrey froze. The Silver River, they were the healers. They were the rulers of the spirit realm, Silas corrected. And you, Audrey, are not a Tate. You are Princess Aurelia of the Silver River. You outrank every alpha in that room tonight, including me. Audrey laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "I'm a cleaner, Silas. I scrub your toilets. You are a queen in hiding. That is why Toby calmed down for you. His wolf recognized your authority before you did. It's why Lydia hates you. Her wolf knew she was inferior." Silas reached out, taking her hand. His skin sparked against hers. "The necklace," Silas said. "I know you didn't take it. I smell Lydia's scent all over the velvet pouch. She planted it." "You didn't defend me," Audrey whispered. The hurt in her voice cut Silas deeper than any blade. "I hesitated," Silas admitted, "and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But you have to understand, I was protecting the pack. I am part of the pack." "No," Silas looked into her eyes. "You are my mate, and I was terrified of what that meant." The confession hung in the air. Before Audrey could respond, the window shattered. Gas canisters rolled into the room. Thick green smoke hissed out. "Wolfsbane, get down!" Silas tackled Audrey, covering her body with his. But the gas worked instantly. It was a military-grade paralytic. Silas's limbs went heavy. He coughed, trying to roar, but his throat closed up. Through the haze, Audrey saw figures rappelling in from the roof. They weren't royal guards. They were mercenaries. They wore the crest of the Southern Pack, Lydia's men. One of them grabbed Toby from the crib. "No!" Audrey gasped, her muscles failing her. "Toby!" Another mercenary kicked Silas in the ribs, rolling the paralyzed king off her. "Grab the girl, too!" a voice crackled over a radio. "Lydia wants to skin the princess herself." A black bag was shoved over Audrey's head. The last thing she heard was Silas's strangled growl of pure, impotent rage as he watched his mate and his son be dragged into the night. Pain was the first thing Silas felt, a throbbing, chemical burn in his lungs from the wolfsbane. But the pain was quickly eclipsed by a hollow, freezing void in his chest where his heart used to be. They were gone. Silas forced his eyes open. The nursery was a wreck. The crib was overturned. The silence was absolute, save for the hiss of the empty gas canisters. "Alpha!" Garrick kicked the door in, his face covered with a wet rag to filter the lingering fumes. He rushed to Silas's side, dragging the massive king toward the hallway where the air was clear. "We have a perimeter breach," Garrick coughed. "Southern Pack mercenaries. They took a black SUV. They're heading toward the industrial district." Silas didn't answer. He stood up, bracing himself against the wall. His vision was swimming, but his wolf was awake. And his wolf wasn't just angry, it was rabid. For 4 years, Silas had been the Ice King. He had suppressed his emotions to keep his sanity. But tonight, the ice didn't just melt, it evaporated in a nuclear blast of fury. They had taken his son. They had taken his fated mate. "Call the enforcers," Silas said. His voice didn't sound human. It sounded like grinding gravel. "Every warrior, every tracker, if they can shift, they fight." "Sir," Garrick hesitated, "Alpha Vane is powerful. If we attack the southern safe house, it's an act of war. The council will—" Silas grabbed Garrick by the tactical vest and slammed him against the wall. His eyes were bleeding into a solid, glowing crimson, the color of a feral alpha. "I am not going to war, Garrick," Silas snarled, his canines fully extended. "I am going to a slaughter." 5 miles away, in the rusted shell of an old textile factory, Audrey woke up to the taste of copper. She was tied to a steel chair in the center of a large, damp warehouse floor. Chains, heavy, silver-laced chains that burned her skin, bound her wrists and ankles. "Audrey!" The small, terrified voice came from her left. Audrey whipped her head around. Toby was inside a reinforced dog cage, huddled in the corner. He wasn't physically hurt, but the terror in his scent was heartbreaking. "I'm here, baby," Audrey rasped. "I'm right here. Close your eyes. Don't look." "Oh, he should look," a voice echoed from the shadows. "He needs to learn what happens to thieves." Lydia Vane stepped into the circle of light. She was still wearing her red gala dress, now stained with grease from the warehouse. She held a hunting knife, testing the edge with her thumb. Behind her stood her father, Alpha Vane, and a dozen armed mercenaries. "You have made a grave mistake, Lydia," Audrey said. Her fear was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of her bloodline. "Silas will come for us." "Silas is likely in a coma," Lydia laughed. "And by the time he wakes up, you'll be tragic history. A rogue who kidnapped the prince and had to be put down." Alpha Vane stepped forward, sneering. "My daughter wants your eyes, girl. She doesn't like the way they change color. Unnatural. We're doing the world a favor by ending your cursed bloodline." He nodded to Lydia. "Do it. Make it quick. We need to dispose of the bodies before dawn." Lydia grinned and stepped closer. She raised the knife. "Audrey!" Toby screamed, rattling the bars of his cage. Audrey closed her eyes, searching for that well of power she had touched in the ballroom. She pulled at the mental leash, begging her wolf to surface. "Break the chains," she commanded herself. Crash! The entire metal shutter door of the warehouse didn't just open, it exploded inward. A truck, a massive, reinforced tactical vehicle, rammed through the steel like it was paper, screeching to a halt in the center of the room. Before the mercenaries could raise their rifles, the driver's door was torn off its hinges. Silas didn't step out. A creature of nightmare launched itself from the cab. He had shifted mid-air. He was massive, easily 7 feet at the shoulder, with fur as black as a starless night. He was a blurred shadow of violence. He hit the first mercenary with enough force to shatter ribs through body armor. The man flew 50 feet, hitting the far wall with a sickening crunch. "Open fire!" Alpha Vane roared, shifting into his own grey wolf form. Bullets hailed through the air, but Silas was too fast. He was a hurricane of teeth and claws. He didn't stop to maul. He snapped limbs and moved on, efficient and brutal. He was clearing a path to the chair. Lydia screamed, dropping the knife and backing away. "Daddy! Kill him!" Alpha Vane charged. He was a large wolf, a veteran of many wars, but he was fighting a king who had found his reason to live. They collided in midair with a sound like thunder. Vane snapped at Silas's throat, but Silas twisted, burying his teeth into Vane's shoulder. With a savage shake of his massive head, Silas threw the older Alpha across the room into a stack of pallets. Vane didn't get up. Silas turned his burning red eyes toward Lydia. He shifted back to human form. He stood naked, covered in blood that wasn't his chest heaving. He walked toward her. Lydia scrambled backward, tripping over her dress. She scrambled until her back hit the cage where Toby was held. Panic seized her. She grabbed the fallen knife and spun around, grabbing Toby through the open bars of the cage, hauling the small boy against her chest. She pressed the silver blade to his throat. "Stop!" Lydia shrieked. "One step closer and I open his throat." Silas froze. He was 10 feet away. He was fast, but not faster than a twitch of a hand. "Let him go, Lydia," Silas said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "and I will let you live in a cell. Hurt him, and I will peel the skin from your bones slowly." "I'm dead anyway," Lydia wept hysterically. "You'll never love me. You chose her. A maid." She pressed the knife harder. A drop of blood appeared on Toby's neck. Toby whimpered, his eyes locking onto Audrey. Silas roared, a sound of pure desperation. But he couldn't move. He was checkmated. "Lydia." The voice came from the chair. Lydia looked at Audrey. Audrey hadn't broken the chains physically. She had melted them. The silver links were glowing red-hot, dripping onto the concrete floor like wax, heated by the sheer thermal energy of her aura. Audrey stood up. Her eyes were no longer just violet. They were glowing white, the color of the moon itself. The spirit of the Silver River Queens, the absolute authority over all wolves, had fully descended. "I command you," Audrey whispered. The sound wasn't loud, but it resonated inside everyone's skull, vibrating their very bones. "Drop the knife." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a compulsion. Lydia's hand spasmed. Her wolf, terrified by the presence of a supreme alpha female, forced her body to obey. Her fingers opened against her will. The knife clattered to the concrete. "Kneel," Audrey commanded, walking forward. Lydia collapsed to her knees, sobbing, unable to control her own legs. Audrey didn't stop walking until she reached the cage. She ripped the door off with one hand. She pulled Toby out, checking his neck. "Mum." Toby buried his face in her neck. "I've got you," she soothed, the white glow fading from her eyes, returning to a warm, honey brown. "I've got you." Silas was there in an instant. He wrapped his massive arms around both of them, crushing them into his chest. He buried his face in Audrey's hair, inhaling deeply, shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline. "I thought I lost you," the king whispered, tears mixing with the grime on his face. "I thought I lost you both." Audrey pulled back slightly, cupping his rough cheek. "You didn't. We're a pack, Silas. We don't break." Garrick and the Royal Guard burst through the hole in the wall, weapons drawn, ready for a fight. They stopped. They saw the defeated mercenaries. They saw the unconscious Alpha Vane. They saw Lydia Vane weeping on her knees, paralyzed by command. And in the center of the chaos, they saw their king, naked and bloody, kneeling on the floor, embracing the nanny and the prince. Garrick lowered his weapon. He looked at Audrey, sensing the lingering power of the Silver River. Slowly, he dropped to one knee. One by one, the rest of the Royal Guard followed suit. They weren't bowing to Silas. They were bowing to the woman who had brought the Alpha King to his knees. The Crescent Peak estate was unrecognizable. The gloom that had hung over the castle for years had lifted. The windows were open, letting in the spring breeze. The grand hall was packed. It wasn't a stiff diplomatic gala this time. It was a celebration. Audrey stood on the balcony, looking out at the crowd. She wore a dress of white and gold, the colors of her house and his. The mating bite on her neck was fully healed, a proud mark of her bond with Silas. "Nervous?" Silas asked, stepping up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "A little," Audrey admitted, leaning back into him. "I'm still getting used to people calling me Your Majesty instead of Hey You." Silas chuckled, kissing the top of her head. "They respect you, Audrey. You reorganized the pack laws, improved the Omega wages, and fired Mrs. Gable all in your first week. You were born for this." "I was born for this," she corrected, looking down at the garden below. Toby was running through the flowers. But he wasn't alone. He was being chased by a golden retriever puppy, his birthday present. He was laughing, a pure, joyous sound that filled the air. He stopped, looking up at the balcony. He waved, his face bright and happy. "Mum! Dad! Come down! The puppy found a frog!" Silas froze, his heart swelling every time he heard the boy use those words together. "We better go," Silas smiled, offering her his arm. "The prince commands it." Audrey took his hand. She looked at the king who had given her a home, and the boy who had given her a purpose. "Let's go," she said. They walked out into the sunlight together, no longer a broken king and a servant, but a family. The curse was broken, the winter was over, and the Wolf King's house was finally, truly warm. And that is the story of how a rejected Omega floor scrubber tamed the Alpha King and saved his son. It turns out, true power isn't about how sharp your claws are, but how fiercely you protect the ones you love. What did you think of Audrey's hidden identity? Did Lydia get what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic werewolf romances, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a part of the next saga. I have a story coming up about a rejected mate who returns as a billionaire, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.